Professeur Robert Destro est expert des échanges commerciaux Afrique-USA, notamment sur l'AGOA. Il enseigne à la Columbus School of Law, Catholic University of America, où il dirige un programme en droit et religion. Ancien secrétaire adjoint au département d'État, il a aussi été conseiller spécial et commissaire au droit civil.
Do I need from you as your business partner to do the business that I want to do? There's lots of opportunities out there. And if we start talking about them in business terms, I think we will go a long way.
Vous donne rendez-vous pour une analyse approfondie de l'évolution et de l'impact des échanges commerciaux entre les États-Unis d'Amérique et l'Afrique dans le cadre de l'AGOA, ainsi qu'une réflexion sur les perspectives d'avenir de cet accord.
Favoriser la croissance économique, l'African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, lancé en 2000 par les États-Unis, est un accord commercial historique visant à stimuler les exportations africaines vers le marché américain.
Au programme, un état des lieux du commerce Afrique-États-Unis avec chiffres clés et secteurs dynamiques, l'importance stratégique de l'AGOA, les effets de la suspension de l'aide américaine via USAID sur des projets concrets, des impacts, bénéfices et limites, les opportunités d'investissement pays par pays, le rôle des diasporas dans les échanges, les politiques américaines récentes, les réussites de l'AGOA, les défis de son renouvellement, ainsi que les perspectives d'un nouveau partenariat économique.
Mais comment attirer davantage d'investissements américains, privés et publics, pays par pays, et certains pays se distinguent sur un nature par leur secteur, le Kenya mise sur les technologies.
En direct de Washington, professeur Robert Destro est reçu par Symphorien Katende, journaliste de Wanjila Connect, le média panafricain depuis Dallas, au Texas, aux États-Unis d'Amérique.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon to you. Thanks for having me.
Rendez-vous ce mercredi 28 mai 2025 à 16h, heure de Washington, 15h, heure de Dallas et 21h, heure de Kinshasa, pour analyse approfondie sur l'avenir de l'AGOA en Afrique.
Which African country received the most US support in terms of economic cooperation?
Well, you know, that's a hard question to answer because the question of...
Suivez-nous à Kinshasa sur Géopolis TV ainsi que sur notre plateforme YouTube Wanjila Connect, tout en activant la cloche de notification pour ne rien rater et rejoignez le débat.
Et l'État du Texas, où nous avons reçu avec beaucoup de joie le professeur Robert Destro.
Wanjila Connect, connecter l'Afrique au monde.
De partout où vous nous suivez, soyez le bienvenu dans votre nouveau numéro de votre magazine depuis les États-Unis d'Amérique, où nous allons parler des échanges commerciaux entre les États-Unis d'Amérique et l'Afrique. Quelle est la vision des États-Unis d'Amérique par rapport à l'Afrique et comment l'administration Donald Trump prévoit mener cette vision? Et que se disent les Africains par rapport à cette opportunité du marché africain? Et pour en parler, nous avons l'insigne honneur d'être en connexion entre Washington et l'État du Texas, où nous recevons pour vous l'éminent professeur Robert Destro, qui est à Washington et nous sommes ici au Texas. Sans plus tarder, nous allons saluer notre intervenant. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon to you. Thanks for having me.
I'm very happy for your presence here for this talk show online with Washington and Texas.
Very nice. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Today is the thread of United States and Africa. The first question is, what is the U.S. administration's vision for Africa? Because you are a professor and the specialist with the question between trade in United States and Africa.
Well, I can't speak directly for the administration because I'm not a part of it. Yeah, but I have been in the administration before, in the last administration of President Trump. So, and I don't think his views have changed all that much. You know, the United States is eager to do business with the countries of Africa, and I think it's just a matter of figuring out how to get that done.
The second question, what is the current level of trade between Africa and the United States?
Well, the question of how much trade is there between the United States and Africa? There's a lot of trade between the United States and Africa, but Africa's a really, really big place. And so we're talking about all the way from Egypt to South Africa. So the amount of trade is huge. So if you really want to get data on what is the trade between the United States and specific African countries, you'd have to look at the website of the United States Trade Representative.
Yes,
that's where you'd find it.
Yeah. My question is, today, the government of the United States, between Mr. Clinton, mind the politics to help Africa to have the opportunity to exchange with American the goods. And then if you see the story of trade for yourself, this exchange is good or the politics is changed now? The first vision for the Mr. Clinton between today is the same way or today is different?
Oh, I think today's different. And the reason
what is it different today?
Well, I think today the emphasis certainly in President Trump is to be partners. And so we don't see, of course, in Africa or the countries of Africa. I keep coming back to the fact that Africa is a very big place. That the difference is that we want to be development partners. And just like you would go into a business partnership, this is what we want with the countries of Africa. Every single one of the countries in Africa, has something unique to offer and unique to trade with the United States. And so it's not our job to, quote, develop your country. It's your job to develop your country, and it's our job to be your partners in doing that.
De partout où vous nous suivez, nous sommes en connexion entre Washington et Dallas au Texas, où nous recevons pour vous le professeur Robert Destro, qui est spécialiste sur les échanges entre l'Afrique et les États-Unis d'Amérique. Nous suivons cet élément et nous revenons après.
Les échanges commerciaux entre l'Afrique et les États-Unis connaissent une croissance significative, malgré des défis persistants. En 2023, le volume total des échanges a atteint 64 milliards de dollars, avec des exportations africaines dominées par les hydrocarbures, pétrole et gaz, les minerais et les produits agricoles comme le cacao, le café et les fruits exotiques. Côté importation, les États-Unis fournissent à l'Afrique des équipements technologiques, des produits pharmaceutiques et des véhicules. Mais le véritable catalyseur de ces échanges reste l'AGOA, African Growth and Opportunity Act, une loi américaine qui permet à 35 pays africains d'exporter vers les USA sans droit de douane. Grâce à l'AGOA, certains entrepreneurs africains, responsables des entreprises de divers articles en Afrique, ont pu percer sur le marché américain. Sans l'AGOA, leurs produits ne seraient pas compétitifs sur le marché, d'après plusieurs témoignages. Pourtant, l'AGOA arrive à échéance en 2025 et son renouvellement est incertain. Les experts soulignent la nécessité pour l'Afrique de diversifier ses exportations et de monter en gamme pour réduire sa dépendance aux matières premières. Avec l'émergence de nouveaux secteurs comme la technologie et les énergies renouvelables, le commerce Afrique-USA pourrait prendre un nouveau tournant. Mais pour cela, il faudra renforcer les infrastructures et les partenariats publics-privés.
De retour sur ce plateau numérique, nous sommes en connexion entre Washington D.C. et le Texas, où nous recevons pour vous le professeur Robert Destro, qui est avec nous. Professor, now, today is the new administration, the administration of President Trump. President Trump said American first. American first is the vision. Now, what is the possibility of America to add the vision of President Trump?
Well, I think that a lot of people misunderstand what he means when he says America first. What he means basically is that it's like when you get on an airplane and the flight attendant tells you to put your own face mask on first and then you help the people around you. Well, the same thing is true with respect to the countries of Africa. The leaders of Africa are supposed to take care of their countries first. And so if both sides come to a negotiation saying, you know, I have an obligation to take care of my people, I'm negotiating for my people, then there's an equality of bargaining position at the table, and we figure out what can we buy or sell, you know, from each other and to each other.
The challenge now, what is the challenge? Because Africa says is the new challenge. Africa don't have the technology between United States. Africa don't have the basic to have a good processus. United States is very, very development in technology and the opportunity. Now, when President Trump, American first, this mind, this vision is to say Africa have to work self, don't have help between United States, Professor Destro.
No, well, you know, in a way, if you and I are going to go into business together, you know, you will bring things to the table, I will bring things to the table. And if we want the business to succeed, we will work together. And so the difference, I think, is between a development mentality, which is basically we assume that you're not equal and it's our job to fix things, and one that says, okay, let's work together and let's figure it out together to figure out what you need. I mean, I have been involved in conversations, you know, about African agriculture. Africa is a wonderful place to grow food and to grow other commodities. And you know, but they don't have the technology. Sometimes they don't have the capital. Sometimes they don't have the investment funds, you know, so when we say, you know, we have to sit down at the table and figure out what do you need to do the business you want to do? And what do I need from you as your business partner to do the business that I want to do? There's lots of opportunities out there. And if we start talking about them in business terms, I think we will go a long way.
Africa have many challenges: war, disease, food. United States cut the program of Help Africa to the USAID. The program USAID help many countries in Africa to help for disease, food. Now, Trump administration cut this program to say American first. Why the administration Trump cut this one when administration went to accompany to success Africa?
Well, because it's a very complicated question. You know, so let me start with the USAID development questions. And that's different, for example, from things like PEPFAR, where you're actually helping people by providing medicines and food, emergency food assistance. But what we need to ask ourselves, did these programs work? And there was serious doubt on this side of the ocean that many of those programs actually worked. And so just because some of these programs went away doesn't mean that there's not a great opportunity for us to create new programs that are more, shall we say, mutually beneficial and effective.
Professor Destro, which sector benefits to the most from trade between Africa and United States?
Well, right now, I mean, again, this is a question that requires a fair amount of research. You know, but the United States does a lot of trade with Africa, particularly in the energy sector. You know, we import a lot of oil from Africa, You know, we do, there's a fair amount of agricultural trade. There's trade in critical minerals. So, you know, yeah, there's a lot of trade. You know, the question is, how do we increase it?
Many countries in Africa say it's very easy to do business with China. China don't have many challenges. Democracy, politics. China is just business to business. Now, to AGOA is democracy and then politics, or business is just business to business. What is the solution for the United States to convince Africa to trade a lot to the United States when China gave many facilities to Africa?
Well, China does give quite a lot of things to Africa, and so does the United States. You know, but the question you're asking me is whether or not it's easier to do business with the Chinese. I would argue to you that it might be easier in the short term. I don't think it's easier in the long term, and because the Chinese way of doing business is not as open and transparent. They leave an awful lot of pollution and environmental damage in their background. And so, you know, if you actually were to do an analysis of how the programs work, I think it's cheaper and more effective to do business with people here in the United States than it is with China.
De partout vous nous suivez, nous sommes en connexion entre le professeur Robert Destro à Washington D.C. et nous qui sommes de ce côté au Texas, où nous sommes en train de parler des opportunités des échanges entre les États-Unis d'Amérique et l'Afrique. Nous allons suivre cet élément important et nous revenons après.
L'aide au développement américaine, vitale pour de nombreux pays africains, a subi des coupes budgétaires ces derniers mois. Une décision qui laisse des projets essentiels en suspens, affectant des milliers de bénéficiaires. Au Niger, le programme hydraulique de l'USAID, qui devait forer 50 puits cette année, est à l'arrêt. Des villages entiers, privés d'accès à l'eau potable, doivent en parcourir des kilomètres pour s'approvisionner. Dans le Sahel, les projets agricoles sont aussi touchés. Les formations et les subventions aux petits exploitants ont été interrompues, menaçant la sécurité alimentaire de régions déjà vulnérables. En matière de santé, la suspension des fonds américains a entraîné des pénuries de médicaments et une réduction des campagnes de vaccination. Des ONG locales tirent la sonnette d'alarme. Face à ce retrait, les États africains et leurs partenaires cherchent des solutions. Relais par d'autres bailleurs, mobilisation du secteur privé ou fonds locaux. Mais le défi est immense. Si la suspension de l'aide américaine soulève des questions sur la dépendance à l'égard des donateurs, elle révèle aussi l'urgence de modèles de développement plus autonomes. Un enjeu crucial pour l'avenir du continent.
De partout vous nous suivez, nous sommes en connexion entre Washington D.C. et Texas, où nous recevons pour vous Professeur Robert Destro. Professor, the news now, the President Trump traveled to Saudi Arabia for exchange for business. What's the vision for administration term to travel to Africa too?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that there's a lot of work to be done, and it relates back to your question about what kind of business do we do in Africa already. I think that we will be seeing over the next few months the efforts of Secretary Rubio and others to reach out to their counterparts in African countries. But it's a little bit soon to be asking that question. The Gulf countries have been in long-term discussions with the United States. The question of trade in Africa is a little bit more of an emerging question.
Which African country received the most U.S. support in terms of economic cooperation?
Well, that's a hard question to answer because the question of what do you mean by support? Because here in the United States, there's government support. That's what USAID was. And actually, AGOA is like that. But if what we're really talking about is U.S. support, then that also means the private sector. So that means the banking sector, the equity sector, and this is where I really do think there's opportunities over the coming years to really get some of that private sector money into Africa. And that to me, at least, is one of the most important goals we could be trying to achieve.
The new administration Trump is the very up for Africa. Africa needs. The President Trump gave the solution for many countries in Africa. Example, the conflict in East Africa in Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Democratic Republic of Congo have many minerals. The African people, the Congolese people, need just peace to trade. Now, what is your vision for the position of American to help Africa to have a peace, to develop trade, to cancel war, to cancel the problem, to have a peace, to develop, to trade with America?
Well, I'll use Democratic Republic of Congo as an example. I mean, I do a lot of work with people in Africa. And one day I got a telephone call that said, could you check and see if you know any American companies in either Virginia or West Virginia who would like to take over some of the mines in DRC from the Chinese? And the first thing the Americans will tell you is, well, what about the security issues? So the very first thing, there's plenty of opportunities for Africans to have Americans come and do business, but the first things they're going to talk about is, well, what do you have to sell and what kind of security do you have? And so when you talk about America coming to invest, the way we Americans think of America is we think of all 50 states. And so if you want people who are good in mining, you want to go to the states that have big mining companies like Virginia and West Virginia, Kentucky, where there's a big mining industry. If there's other industries that you're interested in including agriculture, there are huge communities of persons of African descent. I mean, there are lots of persons of Nigerian descent who live in the Washington D.C. area. They live in New York. They live in Texas. And so this is where those conversations get started. So I think that Africans need to be thinking about the United States in smaller pieces. Think about states, because every single state has an economic development authority. And these are the people who are looking not only to make investments, but also to receive investment.
You say to invest of Africa. What advice can you give to the African authority politics to invite American entrepreneurs, to invite American society company to come to invest for investments in Africa, like DRC, like Nigeria, like Senegal, like every country in Africa?
Well, every country in Africa has a trade representative here in Washington. And it's really, we need to start to get them to get together and talk about, ways in which to collaborate to do business here. I mean, it's, Africa is a big place. It's got 54 different countries, 54 different needs, 54 different sets of human and natural resources. So these are conversations that at least would start here in Washington, but the first thing your trade representative should be doing is looking out across all 50 states and going out to meet people who do business, who might be interested in doing business in your country. I mean, but you can't do that just here in Washington. You have to get out there to the individual states that might have investors or investments that either you would want to invest in or that they would want to invest in you.
Professor Destro, many younger Africans need come in United States for study, for mindsets in technology, in things, when to create the opportunity for the younger entrepreneur, because Americans do business with the country. A lot of younger entrepreneurs, individual entrepreneurs, don't have the opportunity to go to the government to have any information for to go support in United States. What is the advice can you give to the younger entrepreneur, since have a vision for United States?
Well, the first thing I would do is if you're in your own country, then you need to check and see if there's an American Chamber of Commerce in your country. A lot of them have them. I know that there's a Nigerian American Chamber of Commerce. There's the South African United States Chamber of Commerce. I would be very surprised if there wasn't one in every single country. So the first place you would look would be the people in your country who do business here or who want to do business here. And I'm a big advocate for having young people, young entrepreneurs, meet each other while they're still young. And so I have been talking with friends in Nigeria about how we would kind of take some of the entrepreneurial programs that they're doing in Nigeria and then make mirror copies of them here in the United States. So, I mean, people are creative. People, there's a lot of really smart young people out there, and we need to introduce them to our really smart young people here in the United States. So I would start with the local, U.S., whatever country you're in, Chamber of Commerce.
Professor Robert Destro, when you do business, you have the social impact too. Many times in Africa, USAID have many social impact in Africa for security food, for health, education, for many things. Now, Africa cry because the help and the facility coming to United States is cut now. What is the processes for these benefits, can I say, these people anytime receiving the help American to have a solution for the situation, because now the children don't have the help for school, don't have food security. What is the alternative solution for that?
Well, every country is different. In the area of food security, that's an issue that I'm very interested in personally. The food security issue is not necessarily helped by giving you food. In fact, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation their aid programs have not done that good of a job in assisting Africans to grow their own food and become food secure. And so the whole question of what can we do together in terms of the business of food, which is really what we're starting at, is exactly what I just talked about earlier, which is find out who in your country, whether it's the Commissioner of Agriculture, the Ministry of Agriculture, and we can put people together with their counterparts here in the United States. We've been involved in a lengthy discussion with some friends in West Africa about how we do something as simple as move cargo between the United States and West Africa on airplanes. It's not easy to do. And so if you're going to import food or export food from Africa to the United States and vice versa, you have to have good transportation links. So there's a lot to talk about. And but what we really need to do is be helping Africans investing in Africa so that Africans can grow their own food. I mean, that's what food security is all about.
Professor Robert Destro, social humanitarian support is not a partnership, but is very necessary. What alternative proposal should Africa consider to continue receiving social humanitarian support?
Well, actually, humanitarian support is not going to go away. I mean, there was in the early days of the Trump administration, starting in January, there was a big distinction made between humanitarian assistance, which was not to be cut, and development assistance, which was. And, so I think what we're going to see over the next few months is figuring out which things to continue and which things to renegotiate. So I think we're still in the process of learning how this is all going to work. But there's no one specific answer that's going to answer all of our questions.
De partout où vous nous suivez, nous sommes en connexion entre Washington D.C. et l'État du Texas aux États-Unis d'Amérique, où nous recevons pour vous le professeur Robert Destro, spécialiste sur les questions d'échange. Il a travaillé au sein du département d'État américain. Il est en train de répondre à nos questions par rapport à la vision des États-Unis d'Amérique sur les opportunités d'échange entre l'Afrique et les États-Unis d'Amérique. Nous suivons cet élément et nous revenons après.
L'Afrique, un continent en pleine transformation, offre des opportunités économiques immenses. Mais comment attirer davantage d'investissements américains, privés et publics, pays par pays? Certains pays se distinguent sur un nature par leur secteur. Le Kenya mise sur les technologies avec des hubs comme Silicon Savannah. L'Afrique du Sud devient un leader des énergies renouvelables, tandis que le Ghana mise sur une agriculture moderne et exportatrice. Pour séduire les investisseurs américains, les gouvernements africains multiplient les réformes. Simplification fiscale, garantie contre les risques politiques et amélioration des infrastructures. Des mesures essentielles dans un contexte où la politique America First pousse les investisseurs à prioriser les marchés stables et rentables. La diaspora africaine et afro-américaine, qui joue un rôle clé en connectant les deux continents. Ces réseaux facilitent partenariats et rassurent les investisseurs. Reste à renforcer la confiance. Les témoignages d'investisseurs américains soulignent l'importance de la transparence et de la sécurité juridique. Malgré les défis, l'Afrique reste un Eldorado pour ceux qui savent saisir ces opportunités. Un continent en mouvement qui, avec les bonnes stratégies, pourrait bien devenir le nouvel horizon des investisseurs américains.
De retour sur ce plateau numérique, nous sommes en connexion entre Washington D.C. et l'État du Texas, où nous recevons pour vous le professeur Destro. Professor, how can Africa attract more private and public American investments?
Well, once again, this is I think that a lot of the private investment they're going to be worried about security. They're going to be worried about transparency. There's a lot involved with the rule of law. Can I enforce a contract? So this is much of the need to the stability that private investment needs is going to depend on the quality of local government. And I can tell you that's also true here in the United States, is that some places are easier to do business than other places are. And so anybody who starts a business knows it's a very, very hard, there's a lot of work to do. And you have to rely on your local government to make sure that the police protection is there, that the resources are there, all of the things. If I'm going to ask somebody, even here in the United States, to come and invest in my business, I better make sure I have some good legal advice. I've got to have some good banks. So basically it's just like doing business here.
Now, Professor Destro, AGOA is the success or AGOA gonna lose now? What is your vision for AGOA?
Well, I think that I think AGOA will survive. So I don't think it's going to go away, but I do think that it is going to be revised a bit. And any program that our government gets involved in needs to be reviewed every so often to see if it's working the way it's supposed to work. I know that's a politically controversial thing to do. Nobody, wants to have their program reviewed and run the risk that it might be revised or that you might be excluded from it. But I do think that the fact that AGOA is coming up in our Congress for renewal, and that debate is exactly, we need our African partners, our African friends, to be involved in that discussion. Because just as I learned in my career as a diplomat, I need to know what you want. I need to know what you need. I need to know what your priorities are. And the more honest we can be with each other about what's needed and what's wanted, we got to start with the things you need, not necessarily the things you want. So let's just be open and honest over these next few months, and we'll get some good discussions going.
Can you advise for the AGOA alternative, please?
No, not really. I mean, it's not an alternative to AGOA. Well, AGOA is a big program. What we need is country to country. Cote d'Ivoire to the United States, Chad to the United States, DRC to the United States. AGOA is a multi-sector kind of a program. I'm not saying it's a bad program. I'm not an expert in AGOA, so I can't really give you advice about an alternative. I think you use AGOA for what it's good for, and you develop alternative relationships, where it doesn't work.
President Trump says to push many investors to come invest in America, to product in America. Is possible to the African to product in America? What is the way for do that?
Well, yes. I mean, there's a lot of different ways. I mean, every country in Africa, has people who have the capacity to invest both money and talent. Now, my view is that the most important resource that any country brings to the negotiating table is its people, the talents and the energy and the imagination of its people. And so, some of these discussions, at least at the beginning, can be a little bit difficult, just because people don't know what to say. They don't know, well, what do you want to sell? What do you want to buy? And, I've watched those conversations take place right here in Washington, between the agricultural commissioners of a state in Nigeria and my home state of Virginia. And it was a difficult conversation at the beginning because they didn't know what the other person wanted. So I told them to go home, and I'm a professor, so I can give people homework. And I said, go home and make a list of the top 3 things that you would like to sell us. And what are the top 3 things that you'd like to buy from us? And once you start having a discussion about very concrete things, then you get a lot more accomplished a lot quicker. It doesn't make it any easier, but at least you understand each other.
With the American First policy, how can we help more African business invest in the United States?
Well, once again, I think the easiest thing for African businesses to do is to not focus on Washington, but to look at every state separately. Every state has its own economic development authority. So, for example, the state in which I grew up, Ohio, has its own, development authority. The state of Virginia, where I live now, has its own development authority. And they're always looking to sell, to sell the state and to sell its people and its opportunities to investors. So it's not hard. And, but don't expect the federal government, the government here in Washington. Yeah, they'll basically tell you who to call, but and maybe they will bring people together. But, you're going to need to get a little bit more locally oriented to see what people want to buy and sell.
De partout vous nous suivez, nous sommes en connexion entre Washington D.C. et l'État du Texas, où nous recevons pour vous le professeur Destro, qui nous sensibilise sur l'importance des échanges commerciaux entre les États-Unis d'Amérique et l'Afrique. Nous suivons cet élément et nous revenons après.
L'African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, lancé en 2000 par les États-Unis, est un accord commercial historique visant à stimuler les exportations africaines vers le marché américain. En exemptant de droits de douane près de 6500 produits, cette loi devait favoriser la croissance économique et l'intégration de l'Afrique dans le commerce mondial. Pendant plus de 2 décennies, l'AGOA a permis à des milliers d'entreprises africaines de percer sur le marché américain. Au Lesotho, le secteur textile a créé des dizaines de milliers d'emplois. En Afrique du Sud, des vins et des produits agricoles ont conquis les étagères américaines. Mais l'AGOA montre aussi ses limites. Certains pays, comme l'Éthiopie, en ont été exclus pour violation des droits de l'homme. D'autres, comme le Nigeria, n'ont pas su diversifier leur économie au-delà du pétrole. Son renouvellement, prévu en 2025, fait débat. Les États-Unis veulent y ajouter des clauses sur la démocratie et les droits de l'homme. L'Afrique, elle, plaide pour un accord plus équitable et moins dépendant des caprices politiques américains. À l'avenir, l'Afrique pourrait se tourner vers d'autres partenaires ou miser sur la ECAF. Mais pour beaucoup, une version modernisée de l'AGOA reste cruciale pour maintenir le lien commercial avec les États-Unis. Entre opportunités et défis, l'AGOA reste un pont économique entre 2 continents, mais son avenir dépendra des concessions mutuelles.
De retour sur ce plateau numérique, nous sommes en compagnie du professeur Robert Destro. Bilateral agreements are often made between states, but how can the U.S. administration help African entrepreneurs access the U.S. markets when their countries do not have trade agreements with the U.S.?
Well,
really, the most question yet.
Well, I mean, you have to put some pressure on your local governments to have agreements. I mean, this is the purpose of a country's government is to help its people. And so if you need an agreement, then you have to go to your local, to your country and say, let's have an agreement. But you don't need a trade agreement to do business. And this is I think is a little bit of a misconception. That's why I said, start with your local American Chamber of Commerce, assuming you have one.
I actually again this question because a lot of young Africans tell me to ask you this question. Many young Africans in the US and those still in Africa want to study in the United States. As a professor, how would you guide them?
Well, it's a tough question, but as a professor, I'm going to tell you, do your homework. There are lots of places to study here in the United States. There's lots of opportunities. I think that by encouraging African universities to make agreements with American universities is a good way. You don't have to be here the whole time. With online learning, you can actually get, work with American professors and with universities to get your education started. I'm working with a couple of African universities now to try and build some more cooperative programs, and with a very innovative tech program in Lagos, to see if we can't replicate, see if we can't do the same kind of program for our kids here in the United States. So there's lots of opportunities, but you have to do your homework and figure out, what you want to accomplish, and whether or not you actually need to come and study here, why you want to come and study here, and also to create some opportunities for American students to come and study in Africa, because that's equally important.
If AGOA is not renewed, can we conclude that the United States and Africa failed to find a common vision for trade?
No, you can't. I mean, if AGOA is not renewed, it doesn't mean anything about the, it means that people didn't like AGOA. It doesn't mean that we don't like trade. I mean, Americans want to do a lot of business with Africa. The policy question is whether or not AGOA is the best way to do it. I'm not an expert on AGOA, so I can't give you an opinion on that, but I can tell you that there's a lot of really good trade opportunities that are outside AGOA too.
Professor Robert Destro, the last question: what is the important thing to keep for the trade, the business between United States and Africa?
Well, I think the thing to keep in mind is that the trade deals are done one at a time, and it's a lot of work. Most of my business associates tell me that from the beginning of the conversation to the end, it'll probably take 3 or 4 years, to really make something work. But that's also true if you're going to do business here in the United States. If I wanted to start a business in the town where I live, it's going to take me several years to get it off the ground. So my feeling is start with a conversation, and we'll build on it from there.
Thank you so much, Professor Robert Destro, for you be here for this talk show online.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great. I hope we can do it again.
De partout où vous nous suivez, nous étions en connexion entre Washington D.C. et l'État du Texas, où nous avons reçu avec beaucoup de joie le professeur Robert Destro, qui nous a fait l'honneur d'être parmi nous pour échanger sur les échanges entre les États-Unis d'Amérique et l'Afrique. Vous avez saisi la quintessence de ces propos. Restez branchés à nos programmes. Vous nous suivez à Washington, vous nous suivez au Texas, vous nous suivez au Canada, vous nous suivez à Paris et vous nous suivez sur Géopolis TV à Kinshasa. Que Dieu vous bénisse. À la prochaine. Ciao.